Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Post the one event that convinced you of the paranormal broadly being real. Something that was unexplainable and spooky enough to convince you of the existence of paranormal entities, or some world beyond this one. No need for having an explanation of what it was in particular. When I moved out of my parents' place after high school graduation and rented out an apartment from an older lady who had the place built originally to take care of her mother, who later passed away in said apartment, multiple experiences kept happening to the point where I felt like I couldn't deny something out of the ordinary was happening. From food spoiling within a day of buying it fresh at a market, to electronics behaving strangely, lights being flicked on, windows and doors being closed, hearing someone walk around at night when me and my girlfriend were trying to sleep in our room. We eventually moved out because neither me nor my GF could get any sleep or felt safe in the place. After that happened, I became convinced that at the very least, we don't know as much as we think about the world.
I was with 4 other people for this event, who has corroborated that this did indeed happen and was not some weird mass hallucination. Trespassing on a local hiking route around midnight, we already had a weird experience with a crying woman and some weird guy racing after her on a bike on our walk up to a local butte, but that was probably just some weird domestic abuse incident. It was a full moon out as well, which was our reasoning for going on the hike. Since we wanted to see the view, we start hiking up, and about a third of the way up, I think I hear super faint flute music in the distance. I declined to mention it because I figured it was just some hippie playing it. Then a few minutes later, I hear it again, slightly louder this time. I see my friend react to it, so I mention it, and they say, yeah, and we laugh and keep walking. Now, after that, the amount of time between flute sounds was getting smaller, and it was getting louder and louder. What made us notice something weird is that the sound kept changing directions wildly. It kept getting closer and farther and coming from every single side of us that we started actually getting scared. Soon it was getting so close that we could almost see where it should have been coming from, and we were properly spooked. We tried calling out twice, and both times it stopped playing for a second and would play from a little farther away next time. Eventually it began getting farther and farther away until we couldn't hear it. So we finished our hike. Everything after that was perfectly pleasant, but we decided to take a different route down. I've tried justifying it in different ways, but I'm not kidding. Unless someone had a whole troupe of silent, walking, talented flute players out in those woods that night. I don't know what it was. It wasn't subtle either. It was pretty loud and obvious once it really got going, and the speed and differences in locations it was coming from was really extreme.
Sitting at the computer around 11 at night. The door is on the wall to my right. It's closed. Suddenly, I turn my head as I hear several steps moving away from my door, followed by a louder thud. 4 or 6 quick steps like that of a small barefoot child running on the ceramic tiles. I had 2 dogs, and they were sleeping on the other side of the apartment with my mom, in her bedroom. Instantly, after the thud, they jumped up and started barking loudly. No one else in the house except me, my mom, and the dogs. I wasn't especially scared by it because I was already taking it for granted that there's something spooky watching me from the hallway, from some other noises I've heard. I've also seen the dogs following something invisible about a foot off the ground with their eyes, with a slow, measured movement. Both of them at once, looking at the same moving spot in the air when there was nothing there.
Wasn't a huge event for me, but it was my first and only potentially paranormal experience I've ever had. Be me, 19 in 2012. Went to community college in a small town I grew up in, so lived at my parents' house. Always got the general feeling that the house was at least creepy. Maybe not necessarily haunted. You know, like the feeling of being watched, more scared of dark rooms or being home alone than any other house my parents and I had ever lived in. It was a Friday night, but I was a dweeb, so I was at home, but staying up late and playing video games. I go upstairs from my basement bedroom. Drop basement dweller jokes here, please, to make a snack before getting back to whatever game I was playing. Kitchen has a door that goes directly to the deck and backyard. back door has a highly reflective surface. It's late and lights are on, so I can't see out back, just a reflection of the kitchen. I briefly get entranced, looking out back into the darkness. Very clearly in my ear, what seems like right behind my head, I hear the word, "Hey," in a clear male voice. It's so sudden that I turn around, thinking it's my brother, who wasn't even home, he was at college. Or maybe my dad, even though it sounded nothing like him. But of course, no one else was there. Everyone else in the house was totally asleep, and even if they were in the other room, they weren't. The voice sounded like it came from right behind me, in my left ear. This scared me so much, I immediately went back downstairs and couldn't concentrate on my game. Couldn't even fall asleep. Thinking back years later, I remember my sister telling me that she had a very similar experience out on the back deck while smoking a cigarette, hearing a male voice saying, "Hey," even though no one was around. Still creeps me out.
At the lowest point in life, completely destroyed and lost, lay on the wet grass and stare up at the night sky. Suddenly perspective shifts, my sight zooms in and out simultaneously, like I'm looking through a fisheye lens. Feel like I can see forever. Feel the enormity of the stars and the universe start crying in joy and terror. Hear a muffled ringing, humming all around. My body feels completely weightless. Have out-of-body experience for a minute, soaring through the massive darkness of space, come back down to Earth. Take a massive breath in and out and suddenly feel this huge wave of peace rush over me. Realize it doesn't matter, none of this matters. Some of my friends I've told this story to think I had a seizure, but I have no history of anything like it, and I've never had one since. Maybe I was just tripping from the stress, but something changed in me at that moment.
11 years old, 6th grade. The bus drops me off before Mom gets home. Home alone. Afternoon snack, Jiffy cornbread on the stove, pull knife from knife block to cut bread. Suddenly remembered to tell my friend something. Kid energy and impulse to do it now. Set a knife on the stove next to the bread. Walk through the kitchen. Walk through the dining room. Walk into the living room toward the phone, 90s. Hear a loud clattering sound behind me. Still home alone, no pets. Spin around to look. The knife I pulled from the block and set on the stove is about 2 feet behind me. For the first second or two, it is still gently reverberating as if it was just dropped on the floor a moment before. A knife blade is pointed at me. The knife somehow traveled through the kitchen, through the dining room, and was right behind me. Cry and run out of the house, wait for Mom. She comes home. The knife is still in the same spot on the floor. Don't know if it floated after me or just appeared midair behind me and fell.
About 2 years ago now, I started to have all these open eyes and I guess you could call them physical hallucinations. Kept feeling breath down my neck, people touching me, all that stuff. Experiencing odd tastes and smells constantly. I told my doctors repeatedly that it was extremely distressing, but they never wanted to go about helping me put a stop to it, and refused to give me a diagnosis. I'd go into details, but they're long and boring. TLDR is, I feel like I'm probably schizo, but my doc's notes say I'm too well-spoken/self-aware for this to be tenable, and treatment would be wasted on me. Anyway, so along with these physical hallucinations, I guess, I started having extremely vivid sleep paralysis and nightmares in general. Usually it'd be the same man coming to sit at the end of my bed at night, just texting on his phone, or watching me fall asleep. Sometimes he'd be comforting. Other times there would be these shadows around him that were always so threatening. Eventually, the worse I got. I couldn't eat anymore because all the food tasted horrible. I couldn't take care of myself. I even started having seizures. So I moved back to my mother's house, leaving my boyfriend behind to take care of my pet snake, Little Q, who I'd kept and loved since I was 13 years old. A few weeks later, I had another nightmare. I was back in my old family home just after my parents split up. My mom always maintained there was some history with that flat. I'll go into detail if people ask. Doubt it. But otherwise, the house was kind of spooky. Something was wrong with my mother in this dream. She looked like my mother, but her throat was swollen and her eyes were red and puffy. I don't remember her doing anything but skulking around the living room, sort of just muttering to herself about how much of a burden I am on her, how she wishes I'd never been born. Then she takes my snake out of his vivarium, and staring right at me, she slits his skinny little throat. It was so graphic. Anyway, I woke up feeling sick from that dream. Feeling empty, like something was really wrong. So I go to the living room. Mom seems totally fine. Honestly, just quiet. We have a relatively normal but silent morning. I force myself to have a cup of tea. Then I get a phone call from my boyfriend, and he tells me bluntly that little Q is dead. First words I'd heard from another human being that day. My snake just died, in the middle of the night, by the looks of things. A seemingly perfectly healthy 8-year-old snake. I didn't know what to say. Boyfriend thought his heating system must have malfunctioned, and maybe he'd gotten too cold, but he could have handled a single night of being cold, surely. So I just told him, okay, and I hung up the phone. It took me a good week before I could start crying about it. I couldn't sleep anymore because I was afraid I'd dream about little Q, or even someone else. It felt like dangerous to think of any of my loved ones for some reason. It sounds stupid, but the timing was just so bizarre, to have that particular dream. Wake up, experience this void of silence for an hour, then get told my snake is dead. If I wasn't feeling schizo before, I felt absolutely 100% schizo then. I can't put into words how much it messed me up to lose him like this. To pay respects to little Q. That snake was like my child. I loved him with every fiber of my being. My little watchdog. Sorry, this was long and boring. I've not really talked about this before.
I have experienced 4 things. Heard a strange laugh in a place literally called the Trollwoods. Seen a human shadow crawl across the snow where no humans were. Heard a monstrous roar in the forest, the likes of which is not produced by any native animal. Nor any animal I have been able to identify. Closest I could find was a lion, which sent me and everyone in my group into a blind panic. Had my bed start shaking in the middle of the night. I was sleeping in a room that used to be a dungeon cell back in the 1700s. Some dudes got hanged there.
Sure, 2011 or 12. Playing video games at a friend's house, home alone. Some Resident Evil game for Wii or something. Pause the game to drink Pepsi. The door to his living room is almost in front of us. TV is hanging 6 feet from the ground. See a huge shadow glancing from one side of the door to the other. Stopped drinking. Stopped talking. Hey, did you see that? Says my friend. Yeah, what was it? Don't know, scary. Keep playing video games, slightly spooked. I can't explain what happened that day, and since we both saw the same thing, I think it gives an aura of authenticity. Some other happenings. The house of this chick I'm dating is obviously haunted. Weird noises at a particular hour of the day and night. Things move around. Strange voices, etc. One night we're talking on the telephone. This is early 2010s. Here in South America, cellular phones are still really crappy. We always talked for a couple of hours. She's scared because it's incredibly windy outside, and through the line you could hear strange bumps and smacks all around. Everyone is sleeping but her. She's scared of her room because she once saw some black figure in a corner, and so she sleeps on a sofa bed in the living room. She's almost panicking, and I'm sitting there like an idiot trying to calm her down. Start searching online what to do when a ghost is angry. Tell her to tell the ghosts, please stop the noise. Complete. Silence, for about 2 minutes or so. Then the strange and deliberate bumping in her attic starts again. Sometime later, she finally dozed off. Didn't hang up because she told me to stay put for a while, and since I'm a good boyfriend, I do so. She wakes up scared. Someone moved my bed, the phone cable is completely stretched. I'm going to sleep with my mom's. Get spooked.
I married a young lady from the Philippines and spent several years living with her on the island of Luzon, a small town about 70 miles north of Manila. When I was living there, I was repeatedly warned by people not to leave any house doors or windows open at night because of the danger from aswang. At first, I dismissed the notion of aswang as a silly superstition and ignored the advice to keep the house shut up at night. I couldn't stand the heat. When I inquired as to exactly what an aswang was, my wife told me that there are certain families in the Philippines, notably in the Central Visayan Islands, who are not human beings but entities of an evil nature, having the power to literally shapeshift into something resembling a large bat or bird. At night, my wife explained, these people shapeshift and fly off in search of blood. When they find a victim, preferably a human victim, they sink a long sort of proboscis into the flesh and drain the blood. This, I was told, often results in the death of the victim from blood loss, When I was told all this, I laughed and refused to take it seriously, but I eventually discovered that there is much evidence that aswang almost certainly does exist. The ability to shapeshift into an aswang exists only within certain families in the Philippines and appears to be carried through the bloodline. Apparently, members of these notorious families never marry anyone who is not also a shapeshifter. Thus, the bloodlines are never mixed, hence never diluted with normal human bloodlines. I learned from my wife's mother that she was once a victim of an aswang attack, but fortunately woke up during the assault and cut off the proboscis of the entity with a sharp knife that she habitually kept under her pillow. I discovered that many people in the Philippines sleep with a knife under their pillow in case of an aswang attack. During my time in the Philippines, I found out that the phenomenon of the aswang is taken very seriously by many people there, and is almost universally accepted as a fact by the inhabitants of some of the central Philippine islands, where most of the aswang families reside. The ability to shapeshift into an aswang exists only within certain families in the Philippines, and appears to be carried through the bloodline. Apparently, members of these notorious families never marry anyone who is not also a shapeshifter. Thus, the bloodlines are never mixed, hence never diluted with normal human bloodlines. I learned from my wife's mother that she was once a victim of an aswang attack, but fortunately woke up during the assault and cut off the proboscis of the entity with a sharp knife that she habitually kept under her pillow. I discovered that many people in the Philippines sleep with a knife under their pillow in case of an aswang attack. During my time in the Philippines, I found out that the phenomenon of the aswang is taken very seriously by many people there, and is almost universally accepted as a fact by the inhabitants of some of the central Philippine islands, where most of the aswang families reside. He states that he also saw several blood-drained victims of aswang attacks, and knows how real is the existence of these terrible aswang entities. His personal belief was that the members of certain families out there become possessed by evil spirits at night, and are thus able to shapeshift. When in the Philippines, I also heard a story about a man who lived in Manila, who supposedly could shapeshift into a large snake. At first, I was very doubtful about this, but I spoke to so many people who claimed to have witnessed this transformation that I began to consider the story to be possibly true. It appears that not only are there shape-shifting reptiles on this earth, but there are also various other creatures, including the bat-like aswang. I would imagine that all of these entities originate in the lower fourth dimension, but I have no idea how or why so many of them manage to get into the human incarnation. In my contacts with various positive spirit entities some years ago, I was told repeatedly that not only are there negative and destructive non-human entities on this earth, but there are also several positive non-human entities in human form who have incarnated here to try and counterbalance the negativity of the evil ones. So it's not all doom and gloom.
It was August of 2000 when my husband and I moved into our new house. It was a beautiful old colonial that dated back to the mid-1860s. We had 2 children at the time, and our third was born 3 years later. We were in love with the house and the property. It sat on an acre of land and had a detached barn that was about 20 years old. We also had a 2-bedroom apartment that was attached to the house, which would serve us well for extra income. The main house that we lived in had 3 floors. It was perfect for our family. My first experience was around Easter of 2002. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and I was in my kitchen playing Easter Bunny by getting the kids' baskets ready. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular when all of a sudden I had this cold chill go through me. I looked up from what I was doing and saw this black mist circle around the kitchen, and then it just disappeared. It scared me so bad that I quickly finished what I was doing and ran upstairs. My husband was already asleep and I just jumped in bed and curled up beside him. I never saw the mist again other than that night. My next experience happened a couple of months later. It was about 2 a.m, and I woke up to the sound of my oldest son, John, who was 9, at the time talking to my youngest son, who was about 2 at the time. I can hear them talking and laughing. They were laughing so hard that it was making me laugh. Because it was so late, I got up to check on them and tell them to go back to sleep. But when I went into their room, the baby was sound asleep, and my oldest was up in his room sound asleep as well. I was definitely freaked out. The baby's room was before mine, and my son John's room was on the 3rd floor, and he would have had to walk right by my room. There have been more than one occasion that I would wake up to my bed shaking, not violently, but enough to get my attention. I would also wake up to the sound of footsteps in my room and would look around and no one would be there. There were also times that I would just be trying to fall asleep and would get this chest-tightening, anxious feeling that would make me afraid to turn over in fear that I would see someone staring at me or standing beside my bed. Other things happened to my children as well. It was never anything physical, but they would hear their names being called. One day, it was around October of 2006. It was cold out that day, so I left my then 4-year-old home with John, my oldest son who was 13 at the time, so that I could pick up Jeremy from school. The school was within walking distance from the house. The boys could see me walking from the window in my son's room, and they said that as they were watching me, behind them coming from the bottom of the stairs, they could hear me calling them individually by name. They got scared because they knew it wasn't me, because they were watching me from the window walking down the street.
When I was 12 years old, my family moved into a house in rural Mississippi. We're not from here. It was due to my father's job. House had a lot of paranormal poltergeist activities, had objects being thrown across the house with no rational explanation. Skip to about 10 years later. I'm a level 99 Fedora Lord in full euphoria trying to disprove all paranormal shit. This is around the time the Ghost Hunters TV show came out and every asshole who had a Ouija board thought they were going to have the next sci-fi show. I'm a film friend and have all the equipment to record a show like this. Basically, my time is spent finding these assholes and debunking them. Pretty good at it since most of this was just bullshit. Get to one night we're at a college that was supposedly haunted. Nothing was there, and I'm doing my usual thing when I get this sudden dread of my loved ones being killed, followed by visualizing it, then scratches start manifesting on my arm. A lot of other weird shit happened that night, but it snapped me into remembering that the same thing happened in the house in Mississippi. Literally came home, deleted all the footage, cut all contacts with the majority of people I knew, and fell into a depression that lasted 3 years. When I finally came out of it, I realized this shit was real, and swore to never screw around with it again. At least intentionally like I did.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.